Good morning, good afternoon. It looks like people are still joining, so we're going to give it another minute or two before we get started. So thank you. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our session on mitigating third-party data privacy risk using ServiceNow. My name is Mike DeAndre, and I'm the GRC Advisory Solution Architect here at Covestic, and I specialize in helping our customers understand how they can leverage their investment in ServiceNow to comply with various privacy laws and regulations. I'm joined today by my colleague, Eric Smith, our Integrated Risk Management Pre-Sales Lead and ServiceNow Platform Solution Consultant. Eric, would you please introduce yourself?
Thanks, Mike. So Eric Smith, as Mike said, I lead pre-sales here at Covestic. In my 10 years, the last 10 years, I've been focused on ServiceNow. Most of that time as a business process consultant and a solution architect around governance, risk, and compliance. And then the 10 years before that, still in IT, but I was in financial services and healthcare, two very privacy sensitive, very compliance oriented areas to do business in. And I'm really excited to be part of this ServiceNow journey towards IRM, and it's great what they've built. And thanks everyone for joining us today so we can learn about vendor risk in particular.
Okay, thanks, Eric. So today we're going to talk about, and then we're going to actually demo how you can use ServiceNow to manage, monitor, and mitigate your third-party data privacy risk. But before getting started, let's take care of some housekeeping. So please submit your questions via the chat window. Eric and I will answer as many as time permits at the end of the session. And if there's any that we can't get to today, we'll definitely answer those via email. Also, I want to let you know we are recording today's session, and we will post a copy of the recording along with the copy of the slides on our website, and they're typically up there within 24 hours. And last but not least, just a quick disclaimer. Everything we present here today is for informational purposes only. We're going to be talking about privacy laws and regulations, but nothing we say should be construed as constituting legal advice. Also, everyone attending today will be entered into a drawing where you will be eligible to win a $250 Amazon gift card. And the drawing is tomorrow, and the winner will be notified via email. So please keep an eye out for a notification from our team, and good luck to you all. So we're going to start off with a high-level overview of third-party data privacy risk, what it is and why it's important. And then we'll talk about how you can leverage ServiceNow to mitigate that risk. And then once we lay this conceptual foundation, we'll demo in real time how to set up and conduct vendor risk assessments. This will allow you to see firsthand the kind of interactions your vendor risk managers and assessors, as well as your vendors, should expect to experience when they conduct a risk assessment using ServiceNow Vendor Risk Management. Then we'll wrap up today with our Q&A session. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, third-party data privacy risk. Well, as you all know, in today's highly competitive global and digital economy, businesses must rely on a network of vendors to provide the products and services they need to generate revenues, to reduce costs, and to help them achieve and maintain a competitive advantage. Even moderately sized businesses often rely on hundreds, if not thousands, of third-party vendors. And one of the most common types of third-party vendors that businesses rely on are data processing companies. So last year, 90% of businesses reported that they relied on vendors to process data on their behalf. All different types of vendors like payment processors, order processors, credit card processors, data mining and data storage and data destruction services like Iron Mountain, and even contracted call centers that businesses hire to take orders and respond to customer inquiries. So while relying on all these vendors is essential to a business, it also introduces a significant risk. Last year, 21% of data breaches were confirmed to be caused by vendors, with the average cost of a data breach at $4.29 million. And when a vendor was involved, this cost went up by nearly 10% to around $4.7 million. And 2/3 of these companies reported seeing a growing number of third-party incidents, and 46% acknowledged that managing third-party risk is a priority for them, but only 37% said that they had sufficient resources to adequately deal with that risk. So as a result of this underinvestment in resources, 50% of companies said they didn't have a clear picture or understanding of the nature of their third-party relationships. And 43% indicated that they lack sufficient knowledge of contracts, terms, and conditions. And 41% reported that they don't even monitor vendor risk. So this situation exposes these businesses to significant risk. And this risk is greatly magnified when personal data is involved. Now, personal data is any information relating to an identifiable individual, and it's commonly referred to by other terms like personal information, or PI, or personally identifiable information, PII, or similar terms. And while different laws define it differently, personal data includes things like age, marital status, voter registration, social security numbers, bank account numbers, but it also includes things like purchasing preferences and even internet browsing habits. So this information has this information has value not only to your business, but also to hackers. And since this information is so personal, any misuse or unauthorized disclosure can cause harm to your customers, like identity theft, financial loss, or even reputational loss. So this constitutes what the Federal Trade Commission has referred to as an unwarranted invasion of privacy. So to protect individuals from potential harm, governments around the globe have enacted stringent data privacy laws that make businesses that collect and process personal data accountable for safeguarding that data, no matter who does the processing. So this means your company can be held legally liable for your vendor's failure to adequately protect the data that they're processing on your behalf. And you're probably familiar with the EU's General Data Protection Regulation. It really set the bar for privacy protection worldwide. But if you do business in any of these other jurisdictions, I'm sure you're familiar with their requirements as well. Now, here in the United States, there's really no comprehensive federal data privacy law. And while there are industry-specific federal laws like HIPAA, which has stringent protections for protecting the privacy of personal healthcare information, personal data protection is largely left to the states. And California led the way with the passage of the California Consumer Privacy Act, or the CCPA, and that just went into effect in January of this year. But other states like Nevada and Maine are following suits, and they've enacted their own laws. And many other states still have their own data privacy bills working their way through their respective state legislatures. And Covestic has published a series of blogs on the CCPA, as well as on the state of privacy laws across the country. And you can access these on our website and at the link shown below. So what do all these different types of privacy laws have in common? Well, they've got a lot of things in common, but one is that they impose very hefty fines, both civil and criminal fines for violations. And when that violation is willful, various departments like the Department of Justice in the United States can get involved and bring criminal charges. And in addition to that, many of these laws provide for a private right of action, like the CCPA and HIPAA. And this grants individuals the right to basically sue organizations that fail to protect their personal data. And agencies can get involved, like the FTC, and end up exposing your organization to basically increased government oversight. So these consequences can be significant to your organization. So what do you do about it? How can you protect your organization from third-party data breaches? Well, it's really a good idea to start with a strategy for screening, contracting, monitoring, and auditing your vendors. And screening, of course, is your first line of defense, but your vendors must also understand your requirements. You need to make sure that they understand what's expected, and they need to agree to those, to abide by those standards, by your requirements. And then, of course, the best practice is to continually monitor the vendors to make sure they're doing everything according to contract as expected of them. And it's always good to conduct audits of the vendors to double check and to, basically gain that extra layer of assurance. So basically the idea is to trust but verify. So no matter how much you trust a vendor, the best practice is to monitor them. And last year, 94% of businesses reported that they trust their vendors explicitly, but only 59% actually assess their vendors. And fewer yet, only 25% audited their vendors.
Yeah, and Mike, when I see these numbers, what occurs to me is there's been a tremendous amount of focus here, rightly so. And you've kind of laid out the potential fines. You hinted at some of the potential damages, but those 59% of the businesses, the rest of them are opening themselves up not just to those fines and damages, but reputational risk, which can be massive. And we've seen that happen. And you and I know it doesn't have to be that hard. You can get something in place. Again, like you said, it starts with a strategy. But also that 25% of businesses auditing, that to me is just as risky, because you definitely have to inspect what you expect. If you're not auditing, if you're not going back and doing a look back and saying how we did, there's no continual improvement. Making sure that you're asking the right questions the right way of the right vendors. Just inspecting the product, the process itself. So I think the audits can be critical as well.
Yeah, good point. That's exactly the situation. And we actually saw earlier that the lack of resources make vendor risk management very challenging for businesses. And a common refrain I often hear is along the lines of so many vendors, so little time. So anything that you can do to enhance the efficiency of the vendor risk, of the overall vendor risk assessment process, that's a good thing. And this is where ServiceNow comes in and what ServiceNow really excels at. So Eric, you want to tell us a little bit about the ServiceNow Integrated Risk Management Suite?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mentioned at the top, I've been working with ServiceNow GRC application for, about 10 years. I think it's actually more like 8 or 9 years. And, back then it had a really good workflow. There was some policy and compliance in place. There was some risk management in place. It was very IT focused. But, these last few years, wow, as ServiceNow has matured towards integrated risk management, it is amazing the application I believe they put together, and others do as well. ThirdParty, Forrester, Gartner said the same. As far as completeness of vision and ability to execute, ServiceNow is moving ahead. So what is the application? Well, it's these 4 areas that you see here. Policy and compliance, that's kind of the, excuse me, the blocking and tackling. So as a business, we have external regulations and frameworks that we're subject to. Well, what are the controls in those regimes, and which ones apply to us? And then how do we scope that, if you will, to our organization? What applications, databases, devices, entire services, areas of business are subject to these? How do we manage that? Well, policy and compliance brings all that together in a relatively easy area to manage, so you can have continual compliance. That continual compliance is critical. ServiceNow does it really well. It's not just, hey, let's see how we're doing, today. It's right there in your face which controls are at risk. There's a lot of good monitoring and reporting to that end. Risk, initially ServiceNow was primarily just IT risk, but it's really expanded into the business. And there's a lot of great features there to adequately describe a risk so that it can be a part of your strategy to mitigate. The annual loss expectancy, the likelihood to occur, all those things can be measured. And then also, well, what if a risk has happened and now it's an issue? It's in our lap, so what are we going to do about it? Well, you can store your strategy to remediate that and go after it. It can also let you know of things that might be, vulnerabilities in your IT stack, if you will, and get ahead of those, relate those to risks, so that when you're pulling people into that process, everybody knows what the cost of that is. Well, what's the cost of not doing it? Risk can help you understand that. Audit, the audit application, what I love about it, there's a few things. One, audits are never fun. I'm sure there's some folks who enjoy them. They might be on this call. I love you for that. But what's always painful is gathering all the right evidence, getting it in a presentable format, either for an external auditor or for your internal group. And ServiceNow helps you out with that. And there's also some other accelerators. So you can copy a previous audit. It had all the right tasks. It had all the right process flow. It had all the right requests in it. Let's go ahead and leverage that audit for a new audit. Change the assignees and move on. ServiceNow can help you accelerate your audits by making things repeatable. And then vendor risk, which I won't belabor too much because we're going to be seeing it today. But the vendor risk management application, what I really like about it is that it's been built with the vendor in mind. In order for all of this to work, it has to be relatively easy for the vendor to respond to. They've got a day job too, but we need our information. So ServiceNow provides a portal and a really good framework that Mike's going to show you to get those vendor responses very easily.
Okay, great. Thanks, Eric. I just want to reiterate that all of these applications are fully integrated out of the box, and we'll see how this integration can be leveraged when doing vendor risk assessments here momentarily when we start the demo. But before diving into the demo, I just want to do a quick synopsis of how vendor risk assessments are created in ServiceNow. And this will help hopefully make the demo much more meaningful. So the main thing you need to understand is that vendor risk assessments are really built from the bottom up. You start by creating a library of questionnaires and document templates. Typically, for example, you might have different questionnaires for different types of vendors. You might have one questionnaire for a hardware vendor, another set of questions for a software vendor, and yet another set of questions for a data processing vendor, and same thing with the document templates. You may request different documents from different types of vendors. So you created your library of questionnaires and document templates, and then you draw upon these resources to create different types of assessment templates. For example, you might want to assess your strategic partners differently than you would assess, say, your just-in-time product suppliers. So the idea is you create your library of templates that you would use for assessing different types of vendors, and then to actually assess a particular vendor, you would pull that assessment and associate it with the vendor. So here we see that you take this assessment template, which is comprised of questionnaire templates and document request templates, and you assign it to a vendor. And in today's demo, we're going to be using a fictional vendor called DataNow. And so you associate this assessment template with the vendor DataNow, and you send it, that creates the vendor risk assessment, and you submit that to the vendor. Okay, now once that assessment is submitted to the vendor, it's immediately available in the vendor portal. And the vendor has access to this portal. So the vendor can come in, open the assessment, review the questions, respond to the questions, provide any documentation that's necessary, and then return that to your risk assessors, to your vendor risk assessors. So then your assessors can review the responses and generate any observations or issues, and can assign those back to the vendor to address, and then the vendor will address those issues and complete any tasks that are assigned to them, and then return the assessment back to the assessor. So all communications between your organization and the vendor takes place in this vendor portal, and they take place in real time or near real time. So with that, let's go ahead and see what all this looks like in the actual ServiceNow application. Okay, so here's our Covestic instance of ServiceNow, and we are running the Paris release. And you see here in my favorites folder, I have the IRM suite of applications, the policy and compliance, vendor risk management, audit, and risk. And of course, this is only one suite of all the multiple products available from ServiceNow. So let's go ahead and jump right into our vendor risk management application. And the first thing I'm going to do is go into my vendor portfolio and find my record. I'm going to bring up our record for DataNow. So I bring up our record for DataNow. I open up the vendor record. And the first thing I see is I get a little message up here reminding me that this particular vendor is scored using a default scoring rule, which is available out of the box with vendor risk management. And of course, you can build your own scoring rules if you prefer a different methodology. But what we see here at the top of the record is just some general information about the vendor, name, website. We see it's a data processing vendor that provides technical services. Over here, we see that we've rated this vendor before, and it turned out to be a minor rating. And this is good because this is a critical vendor that's a valued partner. And then down here, we have a little bit of information about the vendor, and we're told that this vendor processes and reports on data collected from two of our very important systems, our officer call system and our customer loyalty program. And here in the middle section, we have additional information about the vendor. And what I really want to draw your attention to are these tabs down here. These tabs are in ServiceNow are referred to as related lists, and they show information that is relevant to this particular vendor. This information can be stored anywhere in the enterprise throughout the ServiceNow database. So vendor agreements. Well, we saw earlier that one of the issues that vendor managers reported last year was that they lacked visibility into the terms and conditions of the vendor contract. And so the vendor risk manager can just come into the vendor, come here, open up that record and see the actual data processing agreement. Now, here we have a hard copy of the agreement attached, so the vendor risk manager can download it, look at it. But because this vendor was a critical vendor, we actually cited all the sections of this particular contract. And so we see that there's 15 sets of provisions starting from how many are 14 sets of provisions for this particular vendor. And for each of these provisions, we've associated control objectives so that our policy and compliance division can make sure that this vendor is complying with all of our internal requirements. So we get a full view, high visibility into this vendor and what the different requirements are within this vendor, of this vendor. Okay, so let's jump back to our business services. Well, we saw earlier here that this vendor processes data that's generated from our officer call system and our customer loyalty program. When you're defining an assessment for a vendor, it's good information to know. And so you can come in here and take a quick look at what that particular process is within your organization. You can read all about it, and that'll help you in defining what types of templates to use or what types of questions to ask that particular vendor. And our next list is the vendor contacts. Now, there are two types of vendor contacts in ServiceNow. One is a primary contact and the other is a secondary contact. Anybody who's a vendor contact, can go into the vendor portal and respond to the questions, complete various sections of the questions of the questionnaire, or provide documents. But the primary vendors have additional capabilities. The primary vendor contact can manage the secondary accounts within their organization. So this means that the primary contact has the capability of creating user accounts for that vendor, for that secondary contact to access the vendor portal. And this takes the responsibility of managing a large number of accounts. It puts it in the hands of the vendor rather than in your hands. So this means you can be freed up from getting calls saying, "Hey, I forgot my password." Instead, the primary contact at the vendor's location handles all that account management. Assessments, we're going to come back to this in a minute because that's going to be the heart of our demo. Vendor risk issues. So if we do a assessment and we find that there are issues related to that assessment that we want to have the vendor remediate, or maybe there are issues that we'll run by our internal team, like maybe the security team, to see if we can accept that issue. Those issues would be listed in this list, and we see we don't have any now, which is a good thing. Similarly with tasks, if upon reviewing an assessment, we assign tasks back to the vendor to complete or to perform, those tasks would be listed here, and we could track the progress of those. Now, these last three tabs, risk, controls, and audits, they're related to the other three primary applications in the integrated risk management suite: the risk management, policy and compliance, and audit. And the risk just shows the risks that apply to this vendor, that we're monitoring this vendor for, and one of those risks are the vendor discloses personal information. And then controls, now these are actual controls that are specific to this vendor, and you can see we have 97 of them. This is, this is close. They're almost, they pretty much match up to the control objectives we solved for the vendor that we wanted the vendor to comply with. And so then audit tasks, if there were any, if an audit were being conducted against this vendor, perhaps the auditor will assign a task to the vendor saying, hey, I need some more information, or can you provide certain details for me? Those tasks that the auditor assigns would appear here. So all of this information is readily available to the vendor risk manager. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and look at our history of assessments. So we see here 4 assessments, and we see they're all closed and completed. And the primary, this first one is we titled it the 2019 Annual Data Privacy Full Risk Assessment. So this is a pretty comprehensive assessment. And then each quarter of the year, we created a quick assessment that focused more on just the privacy provisions. So I'm going to open up one of these. I'm not going to reopen it in that sense, but I just want you to see what this particular assessment is comprised of. So we can open up this, we can revisit, I should say. We're not reopening this. We can just revisit this assessment and see, we'll take a look at it. Okay, so we see that this assessment was comprised of a questionnaire and a document request, as we had pointed out earlier. That's how you build assessments. And the questionnaire that we used for this particular assessment was called our Data Privacy Full Questionnaire. And our document request was our Data Privacy Documentation Request. So those were the primary components of our annual privacy assessment. Now let's look at one of our quarterly ones. So we'll just grab any of them. And down here, we'll see that our questionnaire template is different. So we used a different questionnaire called the Data Privacy Quick Questionnaire for this particular quarterly assessment, but we used the same data privacy document request. So as I was saying earlier in the slides, you create these repositories of templates, and then you can combine them in any combination that you need that's appropriate for the vendor. Actually, let's go out and take a look at that repository. So if I come over here to my assessment setup module, I have questionnaire templates, assessment templates, and document request templates. I'm going to go in and open up our questionnaire templates, and you can see that I have our 2 data privacy questionnaires defined here, our full and our quick. And again, I can use those with any vendor, or I can combine them in different ways. I don't need to send, for example, a document request if I don't want to, or I don't need to send a questionnaire if I don't want to, but I need to send one or the other. And here you see all these questionnaires. These are the SIG questionnaires, the standard information gathering questionnaires that is pretty much a standard that's used widely. It's produced by the Santa Fe group. And these questionnaires, ServiceNow actually has a built-in integration that allows you to integrate to these questionnaires. So if your organization uses the SIG questionnaires, they're readily available in ServiceNow. You don't have to build your own integration, they're there. Okay, so I'm going to open up this data privacy full questionnaire to just show you how comprehensive it is. So we have 16 metric categories, and what that means is we have 16 different categories of questions. We have some, general demographic questions, and down here we have questions related to backup and recovery, data privacy, etc. And we have a couple of groups of those. And so that gives you an idea of how how comprehensive you can make your questionnaires. And each of those question categories has individual questions, of course. Okay, so that's, and now the data privacy quick questionnaire, if we open that, and let's go ahead, and we see it only has one category of questions, and just our quick questions. And so if I open that up, I can see the questions that we asked in that category. And you can see most of them are yes or no questions. There's a few multiple selection questions. These questions where you see numbers over here, that indicates that this question is dependent on the response to a previous question. So you can kind of stack and nest questions in your questionnaire. In fact, what I'm going to do is come back over here and actually show you how easy it is to create these templates. You know, we're talking about templates being the fundamental building blocks of building these assessments. So it's important to understand that ServiceNow provides a way to really expedite the creation of these templates. So I'm going to go ahead and click this new designer button here. And what that does is it brings up this blank canvas and a palette of different types of questions that I can use to design my questionnaire. And I could do this all within ServiceNow. I don't have to do it in another application and import it. So just to show you how easy this is, I'm going to grab a Boolean question. I'll bring that over here. And all you do is you click on this gear and you go in and you type in your question. Let's say, I'll make it something simple. Can you answer this question? Okay. And we see that the type is Boolean and it's active, and we can make it mandatory if we want to. We can also allow the addition of information, and there's different types of Boolean. The default is checkbox, but we want this to be a yes/no question. So we're going to go ahead in and type and select yes/no. And then down here, oh, here's the mandatory box I meant to point out to you. And then down here is the, you specify the correct answer. So we're going to specify that we want the vendor to answer yes to this. And so this is very important, because what happens is by you telling ServiceNow what the proper answer to the question is, then when the assessment is completed and returned, you can have ServiceNow do all the work for you. They can, ServiceNow can open up the assessment and generate any issues, any observations for questions that are not answered as expected. So it's really that simple to create a question. And then any question you create, whether in the designer or anywhere else in your questionnaires, you can store those in the ServiceNow question bank. So that means you can reuse those. So I can come in here to my question bank and I can scroll through all these questions and I can say, hey, I want to use this question again. And then, just modify it so it fits your particular assessment. But then you can grab an entire category of questions too. So you can come down here and say, okay, I just want to ask this bunch of general questions. So you can bring the whole category over. So that's how quickly you can create and how easily you can create and design your own templates. And what's really another really cool feature of this is that you can then preview the assessment that you've designed to see what the vendor's going to see. And not only that, but you can actually go through and respond to the questionnaire so that you can make sure that it's functioning the way that you want it to function. So that's how quickly you can create these assessment templates. So I'm going to go ahead and close that out, and we'll go back and we'll actually do an assessment. I'm not going to save this, so we'll go ahead. So now let's go back into our vendor record and navigate back to my data now, and we'll open that. And we'll jump right down to our assessment, and we're going to go ahead and create an assessment and send it to the vendor and have the vendor respond to it. So we'll do another quick assessment, and we do that by simply clicking new, and then I prefer to just immediately grab the assessment that we want to perform. So we want to do another data privacy quick assessment. So we grab that template. ServiceNow automatically titles it, but we're going to change it. We'll call it 2020 Q4, and we'll just do a little edit on the title. Privacy quick risk assessment. And that's it. And so once we've done that, then all we have to do is save it. And ServiceNow will automatically pull in the questionnaires associated with that template. So we see that we've gotten our data privacy quick questionnaire as well as our document request. So at this point, all we do is submit it to the vendor. Once we submit it to the vendor, then I can go in and as a vendor and bring up my portal, my vendor portal, and let's refresh this. Okay, so as the vendor, I come in and, I'm either the primary contact or the secondary contact, but I come in and I can see that, hey, I have this new assessment waiting for me, and I also see that I have 4 assessments that I completed in the past. So let's just jump in and take this assessment. So I open the assessment and we see that it consists of our data privacy quick questionnaire as well as our data privacy documentation request. And we're going to go in and we're going to just go in and look at it. Okay, so here's our questionnaire. So we have 10 questions, which we saw earlier. So let's just go through it. So these are this would be like a sampling. These questions that we're using here for demo purposes are sort of a sampling of the types of questions that you may ask your vendors. So does your organization have a data protection office or similar role? Well, we'll say, yes, we do. And does your organization incorporate privacy by design? We'll say, yeah, that's best practice. We'll definitely do that. And does your organization have and maintain an inventory of systems? Yes, we do that. Has your organization suffered a breach within the past 2 years? Well, let's say, yeah, unfortunately, we had a while back. Does your organization conduct security awareness training? Yeah, good practice. Does an organization, do you comply with global privacy regulations? Now, here's an example of those nested questions. So if I answer yes, I can be presented with a list of choices, multiple choices. And so I can say, yeah, I comply with GDPR and maybe PIPEDA and maybe CCPA, or maybe I don't. And or if there's another one, I can click other, and then I get to type in the name of the other regulation that I comply with. So a similar question, does your organization adhere to any privacy standards? So we can say, yes, we comply with the NIST privacy framework, or maybe the NIST cybersecurity framework, or PCI, or we can indicate any others that we may comply with. And as you saw those, you can nest these questions continuously. Okay, so have you recently conducted a PIA, privacy impact assessment? Yes, we have. And do you have processes in place to immediately notify us of any data breaches? And we'll say, yes, we do. And does your organization contract out to any part of the data processing? We'll say, yeah, we do that. We use a fourth party data service provider. So that's how quickly you can do an assessment. We just save that, then we exit, and then we confirm that we want to save and exit the questionnaire. And now we can go into the document request. Oh, by the way, we could parse this out. So for example, if we wanted Eric to do this part, we could remove Mike from that, and same down here. we could remove, say if we want, we can remove Eric and then Mike would be responsible. This allows you to complete the assessment in parallel. You don't have to do it in a serial manner. So
Yep,
let's
and
take,
this is, and the we here is the vendor, right, Mike? So the vendor could actually say, hey, Mike, you take this part. Hey, Eric, you take this part, right?
yes, thank you, Eric. Yeah, that's exactly the case. This is managed. These are the vendor contacts, and these are managed by the primary contact. And as I said, you can add multiple secondary contacts. For example, in that full privacy assessment, we saw that it had like 15 different categories of questions. Well, the primary contact can come in, look at each of those categories and assign those categories to different people within their organization to complete. So as I said, everything can be done in parallel. Okay, thanks, Eric. Okay, so data privacy document requests. So on the document request, we're asking for 3 different documents. First, we're saying, hey, do you have a SOC or a SOC 2? And we'll say, yeah, we have that. And we can attach that. And so we can come out here very simply, select the attachment and submit it to the vendor. Okay, do you have a data breach response report? Yes, we have that. And again, this is the idea of the subsidiary or not dependent questions. And so we can go ahead and attach our data breach notification plan. And then the last question is do you have an information security plan? Yeah, and we may want to share it or we may not, but in this case, we're going to say, yeah, we'll go ahead and share that with the organization. So, okay. So now we've provided all the documentation that has been requested. So I'm going to go ahead and save that and then exit and close out these informational messages. And so then you see that the assessment is in progress and that we have answered all the questions and provided all the documents that have been requested. So now we're done and we go ahead and we submit the assessment back to the vendor. So I click this and we submit. Okay, so now what does the vendor risk manager see back at your organization? Okay, so the vendor risk assessor is notified that responses have been received, and we'll emulate that here by simply reloading this form. And we see that the state has moved to responses received, and down here we have our document request, and we see it's 100% completed. The vendor has completed it. We can view the responses that the vendor submitted. So we can load those and we can see, okay, here's what the vendor provided to us. Here's how they responded, and we can see that they attached these documents. But we'll go over into the questionnaire, see, how did this vendor respond on this questionnaire? So we come over here and same situation. Okay, they're 100% complete. For those larger assessments that have multiple sections in it, as the vendor completes a section, that's reported immediately to the risk assessor. So that gives your risk assessors insight, your vendor risk assessors insight into the progress that the vendor is making on completing the questionnaire. Okay, so we can come in here and we can view the responses. So we go in and say, oh, okay, so this is what the how the vendor replied, yes. And as we look at each question, we have some options. And one option is that we can flag this question for follow-up. We might want to come back to it later, or we might want to have the vendor follow up on it. We can say, hey, we want to create an issue regarding how they responded here. And so we can click this checkbox to include this question when we generate the issues, and we'll do that when we're finished our evaluation by coming up in here and clicking create issues. So we go down, and one of the other things we can do is to communicate back to vendor, we can just add a comment about this. and we can type in information, any comment we have back to the vendor, and that will appear on the vendor portal. So this is one way of doing it. This is manual. This is a manual way of reviewing the results of what the vendor submitted. But there's another way, you know, and the other way is to let ServiceNow do the work for you. You know, remember earlier I mentioned when I was showing how you create a Boolean question, a yes or no question, how you you indicate the correct answer. And this is where that comes into play, because ServiceNow, when I click generate observations, ServiceNow will do exactly that. It'll go through it and indicate any, generate any observations of things we weren't expecting. And those show up right here. And this is what happened. Remember before we didn't have any issues. Now, as soon as I said generate observations, ServiceNow said, okay, here's 2 things you need to take a look at. And so these are the issues that ServiceNow generates. And then we can open these issues and review them, and we can make recommendations. You know, we can say, okay, let's see, here, what's the issue? And we can come in and we can say, let's go ahead and accept this issue, or let's require the vendor to remediate it, or let's ask for more information. So we have some choices here of what we can do. For right now, I'm not going to do anything. Okay, so we do have those. Now, once we said generate observations, ServiceNow did something else. ServiceNow pulled in the 10 controls that are related to these 10 questions that appeared on the questionnaire, and it showed the prior status of those questions. These questions were all compliant previously, okay? So that gives you insight into the current status of those controls. So we're not going to do anything. We're just going to finalize this with the vendor. We're not going to remediate anything for right now for demo purposes. And when we finalize the vendor, we have 2 issues open, right? We had those 2 findings, those 2 observations. And so because of that, as soon as we said, okay, let's finalize this assessment, ServiceNow automatically flipped the bit on those controls, indicating that those controls are no longer compliant. So in a nutshell, these assessments are very easy to create. You can have ServiceNow do most of the evaluation work for you, and they basically just really expedite the overall process, making everything much more efficient. And not only that, but you can also come in and you can automate the whole thing. So you can set up these assessments so that they run automatically on some periodic basis. You can come in and define what's called a repeating assessment, and then you can say, okay, I want this assessment to run automatically every 12, 13 months. And that's totally up to you as to the, how you can have them run every quarter, whatever you prefer. So basically that kind of concludes our demo today. Eric?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So I think you kind of showcased the efficiencies it can build, but definitely want to still underscore the integration capabilities. If you've got data that you're relying on elsewhere, ServiceNow plays really nice with others, and also it's very configurable. So Mike showed you a fairly baseline view, if you will, unconfigured view, if you will, for the most part. He added some data for the demo, but he kind of used ServiceNow the way it was. Well, you don't have to do that. We definitely don't encourage configuration for configuration's sake. We prefer to stick more on the side of the basic using what's there, adopt versus adapt, if you will, versus customizing it extensively. But there are options if you want a form a little bit more simplified. Our business does XYZ before an assessment is sent. You can build in a workflow in front of it. Lots of options. So Mike, I think we got some great questions I want to get to. So I'm gonna go through this pretty quickly. But to sum up, regulators have made it clear that you are responsible for the data you collect. You can't contract away your responsibility or accountability. And if a vendor has a breach and they're your vendor, that's now your breach. So with that, just briefly, want to kind of summarize what Mike showed you, how to set up your vendors in your vendor portfolio, a little advertisement there. The person at your company who's responsible for choosing vendors may be interested to know that when you do this, you've done a good bit of their work for vendor performance management, a different application in ServiceNow, but it helps companies choose vendors that align, either the capabilities, the responsiveness, strategic alignment, etc. Vendor assessments, we covered that and how easy they can be to build. The intent was for ultimately the business to be able to manage some of this. There's definitely things we can help you configure up front, and I highly recommend it. Having somebody like Mike, who's been a practitioner, and folks like our technical resources who have done this before, helping you out. We saw the vendor portal briefly and how basic, streamlined that is. ServiceNow has been investing in making that even better and expanding its capabilities. We touched briefly on, well, vendor has an issue, now what? The remediation steps that are in there, and here again, you can attach your own workflow to that. And then also we saw some of the suite integration capabilities. Like one of the tabs you saw was audit. You start collecting evidence for an audit. So Mike, with that, let's get to our questions. Several of them came in. This one came in early, and then you kind of covered it at the end, but I want to put it back in front of you just in case there was any nuance you wanted to offer. Can you schedule assessments to occur periodically?
Yes, absolutely. That's what I just was touching on briefly, was the ability to set up repeating assessments. And again, you can define an assessment, and then you can schedule it to repeat at a regular periodicity.
Outstanding. Okay, rapid fire, because we've got a lot of questions. I'm going to take some of these, and I'm going to point some of you. This is kind of for both of us, but I want you to take it first. Can this be tied into my Dun and Bradstreet data?
Oh, that's really a good question, and I'm glad you asked because yes, the answer is yes. You can tie the vendor risk management application into various business evaluation data, so that when, let's say, the Dun and Bradstreet report comes in and it indicates that the vendor should change, it makes us reevaluate the vendor and assign the vendor to a different tier. And when we do that, when we change that tier, then you can set up vendor risk management to then automatically trigger a new assessment that's appropriate for that tier. And again, that can all be automated, so that as soon as the tier changes, the assessment can be generated and sent to the vendor.
Outstanding. And we've done a lot of other stuff, LexisNexis, several other data repositories. We've done a lot of integrations here into the GRC suite. Give us a call with your specific use cases, and we're going to help you out with that. I'm going to take the next two, Mike, because I got a quick answer. Is the vendor agreement mapping process manual, or does the product scan the contract for the controls? No, unfortunately, there isn't that level of magic automation. With all the natural language investment that ServiceNow has been making, I can definitely picture it coming in the future. So it is manual but easy. You can say that these are my data processing vendors, and these are the controls that apply to those, relate those to the vendor. But I also want to point out that there's another easy button. That's policies. We said policy and compliance. Policies are your internal policies, but they relate to external frameworks, or they can, and they're a great aggregator. So you can say that this policy applies to my data processing vendors, and as soon as you make that relationship in the background, then all those controls come along for the ride. So several different ways to do that. We had another question. Is it possible to have the questions side by side, like two columns on the questionnaire? This is for the assessment. The assessment designer the WYSIWYG that Mike showed you, it's single column. And that's, just ease of use. That was the intent. Predictability, so no one adds 3 columns or 5 columns. That was happening, to a lot of ServiceNow instances when the survey feature first started coming out. So ServiceNow pared back on that. If there's an explicit use case there, though, there are other ways to build out those assessments that aren't that designer, and we can, I'm sure, address those needs for you. It is still just a survey in the background. Is there a shared assessment inventory of SIG responses of vendors? So yes, ServiceNow has SIG and SIG Lite available as well as several other flavors. Mike, anything you want to add there on repository of questions?
No, that's that pretty much covers it. Again, you can, as I said, you can build out your own repositories, and you can store questions in the question bank and then draw upon those to as needed.
Outstanding. And we're at our time. I do want to call out one more. It was more of a comment than a question that we got. On average, a publicly traded company can anticipate 20% market hit in valuation due to breach. Yes, whoever sent that in, you're awesome, and that is the truth. I'd almost say maybe it could be higher than 20%, but I don't want to call out any company names. Just go out and search, company data breach. Read those stories of what happened after they got hit with their fines, how their share price get impacted, how the revenue get impacted. It does happen. Don't let it be you. So give us a call. ServiceNow at Covestic is our email. Covestic.com is our website. Go ahead and link up with us on LinkedIn. Follow us on Twitter. We have a lot of great content around GRC coming out all the time, thanks to Mike. So everyone, thank you for your time today. Really appreciate your attendance and great questions. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody.